Hi there, Tylo. Hello and welcome to the TemTeam Cup. This is our, I believe, second group inside this. And this is, of course, NekoBlakii versus Wiki Kernel. So right out the gate, we can see a Valorant ban from Wiki Kernel, which makes a lot of sense given that Valorant's still kind of a tricky biscuit to play around, especially when you don't actually have any electrics. Since Wiki Kernel looks like they're leveraging their own Mashuk inside this. Actually, what am I talking about? They got a Gulzi right there. Wow, quarter. Yeah, just forget that that's an electric. So we see a Gulzi Kinu opener from Wiki Kernel. I'm actually curious about the Vola ban now, unless that was just to stop the Mashuk and the Kinu and Firecoish from being too put upon, but I'm not entirely sure for that. Either way, though, the Yowler ban is always a reasonable one out of NekoBlakii, who has led a Mashuk and is eyeing their Tulkin pretty heavily here. Tulkin's a bit of a tricky play into Gulzi, though, so we can perhaps expect something like, okay, so we see the Amphitheater go for it instead. Now, looking in our second bans, honestly, I kind of like the Ociara ban or a Wolfie ban out of Wiki Kernel here. Yes, we have the Mashuk, but it's still something that is a bit concerning there. They go for the Tulkin ban, hoping to lean in, I'm assuming once again, on their Mashuk. But instead, we do see a Mashuk ban right back from NekoBlakii, kind of nullifying part of that pick. It does mean that there's one less thing that's able to deal with Firecoish, but with Ociara getting almost immediately picked up alongside Wolfie from NekoBlakii, it's looking like this is going to be a bit of a dire game for Wiki Kernel, who does respond with a pretty tried and true Firecoish Village back. So looking like we've got some good aggression coming down from both sides. I haven't seen a Gulzi in a dog's age, so it'll be very interesting to see if Kinu Gulzi will carry this for Wiki Kernel, because that does seem like it plays fairly well into a lot of NekoBlakii's team. So with the Grease Kinu, the obvious pick, given that that means that you can still use Kinu after the latest protector nerfs, means that Wiki Kernel's already got a little bit of chip there on Kinu, but the upside is that means that you can still rotate it out, given that now it continues to trap alongside everything else that Protector does. Now, looking at our opener, honestly, I feel like the Mashuk is the least threatened thing on this board, because it's going to wastewater that Kinu hardcore, unless this is a very fast Kinu. I'm not entirely sure what the Amphitheater is going to be doing this turn. You can expect a Plague from Amphitheater. It's one of its best tools, but my curiosity here is that it doesn't necessarily hit the front line of Wiki Kernel especially hard. Now, if we were to expect something super greedy out of Wiki Kernel, I could expect, if this is trying to make a fat Gulzi, we could see, I don't know, a show-off or something like that. It's just I don't see any partners for that. In the meantime, though, the Mashuk bounces as Mimit shows up, copying the Kinu. I'm a little surprised by that, because that means that you wind up getting trapped with Kinu when you come in, with Mimit when you come in again. But we do see the play go down on Gulzi. And it's a handcuff Fatir. So this is fantastic. This means this Gulzi can't go anywhere. The Beta Burst comes down onto the Mimit, alongside the Sparkling Bullet, which does actually slap a bit. The Diffuser also removing what's likely to be a Doppelganger Brooch from that Mimit for the rest of the game. Well, for the next two turns, rather. I don't expect this Mimit to be living longer than that or staying on the board as long as that. Right. So Wiki Kernel's actually in a pretty strong spot right now. The Plague really didn't do very much to Gulzi, and now the rest of its good moves are online. I don't expect to see a CIF here. Amphitheater tends to be pretty strong, but the advantage is to NekoBlakii for repositioning. A Wolfie swap in here actually feels very strong if it is not read by Wiki Kernel, and Oshidashi would absolutely ruin the poor Fluff Dog. But one thing we can bear in mind with that is that it's entirely possible just to, like, I don't know, sack into Amphitheater. Like, if Wiki Kernel's Kinu has that as an option, like, it feels like a small waste of your Kinu, but it's not overwhelmingly bad. So we do see the Valish come in here, which makes a lot of sense given the fact that Neko's current board doesn't really threaten that enough. We just see a bit more pressure onto the Golzi, though, just trying to sap its stamina as it does things. But the Synergy Sparkling Bullet comes down and just destroys the Kinu before it can move. Looks like it did not go for any priority option, so it might not even have Sacrifice. Hard to say. Now, looking at this does give a free Volphy swap in, but the problem is Volphy doesn't have the Dust Vortex up, meaning that it's more likely for us to see the Mashuk here, which can resist a lot of the damage that is being put out by Wiki Kernel right now, and it can, like, threaten this Valish a bit as well. If this Valish tries to just get a Greedy Madness buff off, the Mashuk can dissuade that a bit with an Uppercut. I don't know what kind of Mashuk this is, though. It's kind of 50-50 in terms of whether you see Tireless or Parrier these days due to the Tireless buffs, which are very good indeed. So, yeah, given the fact that you get a massive buff, well, a significant buff of +1 attack every time you overexert before you do the damage just means that Tireless Mashuk is pretty powerful, but it's hard to say no to Parrier with the, like, 300 effective extra TVs that you get off of that due to just being more able to resist physical attacks. It's very strong. So looking at this, makes sense if we see, like, a Wastewater onto Golzi, since it looks like Neko's trying to focus that, but Valish draws attention naturally due to the power of its ability to self-buff and its ability to heal up after it self-buffs. So I could very easily expect just an Uppercut Plague into Valish instead. It looks like Amphitheater here is basically just Plague spamming, which I don't think is a bad idea, and I think you need to soften up some of this board before Osiara hits it, and you need to stop Valish from Madness buffing if it is going to, otherwise that's going to be a very bad showing. Now, looking at Wiki Kernel, their position is actually really strong here. As I've been discussing beforehand, blapping the Mimit early feels really nice. The Mimit copying the Kinu did not work out for NekoBlakii very much at all. Amphitheater does not hurt this field very much. We've seen that it's kind of been sneezing at the Golzi. It's gotten it down to 42%, but that was 2 plagues, and the stamina bar is still high. Amphitheater actually swaps. As we see the Osiara just hit the field, now, this is probably anticipating no, like, Crystal Spikes in or something like that. Wiki Kernel blinks and swaps the Valish for a Mimit. I'm actually surprised by that, because unless this is a particularly aggressive boy, then that's still kind of straightforward. And the Charged Iron Filings comes down, really damaging that Osiara. The Defuser alongside the Nullify means that there's absolutely... That's just 2 straight-up conditions right out the gate there. That's no Sweatband for Osiara. That's no double screen or whatever it is for Osiara alongside the Mashuk, alongside being able to throw the same thing at them again for even more damage on the Shuk. Now, this Osiara probably wants to get out of dodge. It's possible. A lot of Mimits are very frail, so it is entirely possible to see this Mimit perhaps go down to a Aquatic Whirlwind, but not after the Protector buff. Wiki Kernel using their Mimit effectively to copy one of their best win conditions onto this board, and then just use it again. Honestly, this Golzi is kind of a problem for NekoBlakii, especially since the nullification means that this Mashuk now actually doesn't wind up resisting the Oshidashi if it comes down on it as well. And CIF is available once again for even more damage onto the Osiara. This is looking like a spooky turn. Amphitheater comes back out, able to soak a lot more of these hits. Doesn't like the Oshi, that's about it. Hypnosis comes down, however, putting the Mashuk to sleep before it's able to do much else. As the Uppercut winds up hitting the Amphitheater, it's not very much, but removing the handcuffs is actually very valuable here. Not trapping the Mimit is going to really help. So, yeah, no, I'd say Wiki Kernel has been keeping the momentum here really well. Being able to punish that Osiara, like the moment it swapped in by a good Charged Iron Filings, is kind of showing that NekoBlakii hasn't been very much respecting Golzi as a win condition here. That said, I think the other part of that is the fact that there was more of an expectation that the Amphitheater was going to get spiked to the Shadow Realm from that last turn. One of the things Valish can do against Amphitheater, which tends to spec physical bulk rather than special. But we'll have to see how this winds up going. In the meantime, right. Mimit's kind of popping off. So Shook does swap for Volphy this turn. This is risky. It's basically, once again, anticipating this not being red to swap in the Volphy safely to get the hold up on Dust Vortex. The Plague comes down, but there's no trap. The Beta Burst comes down onto Amphitheater. It's just a bit more damage getting that in there. And the Uppercut does land on Amphitheater. Volphy is safe for a turn. This is probably the opening that NekoBlakii needs. Because otherwise, like, you know, if you can't get the hold up on Dust Vortex, this Golzi is just going to curb stomp you. And that's going to be a really painful thing to have to deal with. I don't see Ociara at like 20% doing enough here. The Revitalize comes down onto the Mimic. So the goal in this case is to weather this rather than trying to outpace it, because the assumption is that the Volphy does outspeed. The Volphy does outspeed, and it only brings it down to 46%. The Oshidashi is going to wreck here, as it actually does not KO the Volphy, bringing it down to 4.2%. So this does mean the Kinu can probably do the rest of the job here. Obviously, the Volphy does have Bush up now. It's got 2 hold up. This means that you would have to double in. Otherwise, the Evade's gonna mess you up, unless this is the mythical Drill Kinu, which it isn't. We already know it's Grease. Problem is, you don't really want to reposition here. You don't want to blink as Wiki Kernel. You kind of just have to double in again. Volphy can't hit you again with the same fervor. You've only got 1 Dust Vortex, unless you're running Sandstorm, and that doesn't hit as hard. It's not likely to KO from this threshold on Mimit. Mimit's probably safe, unless Amphitheater, like, OXs for the Plague alongside Volphy damage. Like, a double Plague might work on it. But in the meantime, a double in on Volphy takes down Volphy and most of the things that come into that slot. Instead, though, we see Wiki Kernel swap the Kinu out for the Valish, just trying to take advantage of the fact that it's likely Golzi's getting focused this turn. Whereas instead, we do see the Volphy bush up as expected. Sparkling Bullet comes down, and since, once again, the bush was up, there was no way that was getting through. It does, however, like, it's still worth keeping people honest and throwing attacks into that, because if, say, Ociara had gotten in for free that turn, that would have also kind of sucked. Because while Ociara is very low, it is probably still the fastest thing on this board, unless Wiki Kernel is running like max speed Valish. That can outspeed Ociara under certain circumstances, but it's kind of a gamble. With this in mind, though, NekoBlakii is very heavily on the back foot here, and yeah, it's the sort of thing where I feel like this Amphitheater kind of has to save the day, and this Volphy needs to survive another turn, neither of which are set in stone, with a Golzi still staring Neko in the face alongside a very hungry Valish. It hasn't buffed up, but at the same time, there's nothing really pressuring it this turn. I don't know, like, if I recall correctly, I don't believe Neko runs Sandstorm. If they do, that's fantastic here. But, I worry about the fact that this is like a perfect opening for Valish to Madness buff. Volphy only having 42% stamina means that it's kind of hard trying to push that further here. You kind of want to bring the Mashuk in, meaning you're only hitting with 1 slot. This also means that you kind of got to juggle the shell game of like, am I getting spiked on Amphitheater this turn? Is the Madness buff even necessary? Neko doesn't even consider it, and instead keeps both slots in and goes for the Mimit, handcuffing it in now that the Amphitheater is no longer seized. The Crystal Spikes does go down, but it goes down on Volphy, taking it down from 14%, meaning that the biggest threat to Valish is off the board completely now. Charged Iron Filings comes down again, as the Amphitheater is now nullified and seized once more, meaning that the Valish can reposition if it needs to, if that Mashuk sneaks back in or anything like that. Although, wow, thanks to the Plague, that was a lot of health that went down from the Overcast there. So, moving into this, our next slugger is obviously Mashuk coming back in here. It makes a lot of sense on this field. The Mimit is depleted, cannot do a dang thing, and it scares the Valish out once again. Fire Koish in the back does not really want to come in on an Amphitheater. Like, You can, but this Amphitheater has not overexerted. It is still kind of a threat. It will Thunderstrike you. You don't really want to move this Valish. So I think Wiki Kernel at this point just has to, like, deal with what's on this board and let the Mimit die so that way the Kinu can come in on that spot. Now, whether NekoBlakii keeps the Mimit alive and just double focuses the Valish, like, I figure that is actually the better play if I'm NekoBlakii at the moment in time. Like, you just want to throw damage into this Valish. But, I don't know. Maybe they got a different plan. My personal take continues to... Okay, like, the other problem here is that I don't think Amphitheater can attack twice. Like, even Tesla Prison from here feels really rough. The Amphitheater might actually survive thanks to the nullification. It does. The Wastewater, however, comes down on the Valish expecting perhaps a Kinu swap. That's a curious one, unless this is just a Tireless Shook. I don't remember seeing a proc earlier. That's a point. So, looking at this, if this is a Tireless Shook, since that was a ton of stamina that it just ate, I believe it overexerts from this. If it is a Tireless Shook, you tend to spec to OX from 2 Wastewaters, because then you get your plus attack up. You start just balling out of control. It's a pretty fantastic build. It is very frail in comparison to a standard Mashuk, so that is a really risky gambit if this is what NekoBlakii is now relying the rest of this game on. Since we have 3 full health bars on Wiki's side, and like just about 1 in total on NekoBlakii's side. I don't like those health differentials here, but I do think that if NekoBlakii plays their card right, they're a very good player. They could still bring this back. But Wiki Kernel has an undeniable advantage in this game 1. So we do see the Firequash come in. The Plague comes down, which knocks out almost half of the Firequash's health on swap. There is no actual like sort of secondary pressure there, I think, unless this is just another Wastewater going straight into that as the Amphitheater actually goes down to the Charged Iron Filings. The Mimit still lives, and it is a Tireless Mashuk. It does OX to the Wastewater, and it comes swinging into that Quaish, which eats the hits, but then basically melts. This Mashuk is definitely going to be running the risk of popping off here. Right, so we see the OCR come out of NekoBlakii. This is the only other thing she's got left. And the Valish comes down, just hoping to weather the storm of this. You got to start getting this out now before the Mashuk starts tearing the rest of your line apart, because you don't want a Kinu just willy-nilly coming in on that. The Kinu can incidentally come in on the Mimit. Neko could predict this and just throw a Wastewater into that slot as well, but the problem is, at this point, now that you've overexerted, you don't want to be clicking Wastewater again. This is one of the biggest problems with Tireless as a build, is that once you're casting from HP, as you do with overexertion, the trade-off for that is, like, I think 1.5 to 1 in terms of HP to stamina, and that is a big order from something as like high costed as Wastewater. So Mimit does swap out for Kinu. So the question is, did NekoBlakii anticipate this? Will this be punished? Or is all the aggression going straight into the Badger this turn? So we see the Aquatic come down. The question is, where's this going to be hitting? My assumption is still the Valish, and it does hit the Valish, bringing it down to 18.9%. The Crystal Spikes are going to come down as well, bringing some HP back to the Valish, thanks to Scavenger. This is the one move that OCR was able to get off. Makes sense to pop your Prio when you know there's going to be Crystal Spikes coming your way. The Uppercut comes down and destroys the Valish in one fell swoop. It looks like NekoBlakii is going to be able to take this back. It all comes down to, does this Kinu outspeed this Mashuk? And since this is a Tireless Mashuk, it is going to be faster. Oh, one thing I did forget, we still do have a Mimit. Now, the Mimit is basically dead, but the problem is that does mean that NekoBlakii can't really afford the hard overexertion from a Wastewater here. If she has a Rushial, that's fantastic. I don't expect many people are actually running a Rushial on Tireless. I think it's good, but I think that base power is going to dissuade a lot of people. And also, like, Tireless Mashuk already kind of wants a very locked moveset as is. It doesn't matter, the Kinu outspeeds, and the Beta Burst knocks down the Mashuk. Wiki Kernel takes game 1, 2 Tems up from NekoBlakii. Well played to Wiki Kernel in that first game. The next question is, how is NekoBlakii going to adapt in our second game here? Of course, these are best of 2s. There is no other bit alongside that. So we don't have our best of 3s in here for a tiebreaker, but what should be interesting is precisely whether NekoBlakii can bring this into a 1-1 or not. Now, you might be asking to yourself, how do these wind up figuring? The basic concept here is that getting a 2-0 on your opponent gives you more points for the overall tournament than a 1-1 would to either. Like, if it's a 1-1, then both players get a certain number of points that are smaller than if you 2-0 your opponent. So that's how the best of twos are working inside this scenario for anybody who is curious about that. And with that, we're just waiting with bated breath for NekoBlakii and Wiki Kernel to get into their second game. I've just been informed that we're taking a short break before they get back in again. This is always a wise thing. It can be a bit draining doing games back-to-back, so we'll be right with you when we get our next match. And with that, we are back into our second game between NekoBlakii and Wiki Kernel. Now, one thing we did see out of Wiki Kernel that I was kind of curious about that I guess worked out for him was the Valorant ban in last game. I still feel like if you're leveraging Golzy as hard as you are, then that's still really good. But we have seen that, that Valorant does a lot more to the fire quench in the back, which admittedly didn't do very much last game, but could still be pretty valuable there. NekoBlakii instead bans the Kinu first this time. Rather than the Yowler, still splitting apart that pairing, while not necessarily leaving the Kinu there to like buff up that Golzy, which definitely messed up NekoBlakii in that last game. Now, looking at what Wiki Kernel does want to ban, we do see the Vola still gets first banned there, and we see NekoBlakii actually goes Valish Mashuk this time, which is interesting in the face of a Fire Quench. Now, we do know this is a tireless Shook that is probably going to tear this Fire Quench apart. My question is, yeah, the Yowler was kind of what I was looking at there. Like, that's a really good lead into this. Now, this could be bait. If this turns into an Ociara, that's a nightmare for Wiki Kernel because you lose all of your offensive momentum in there. And most importantly, NekoBlakii can, in this instance, pick either Token or Ociara, whichever one doesn't get banned, and then have a free swap in for that Quetzaleno turn 1, which feels really nice. That kind of deals with a lot of the rest of this. Looking at this, though, if that is the case, then we still have, like, Hedgen and Golzy in the back to try to punish that. I just don't quite know what Wiki Kernel does to stop there being a swap-in for this turn 1 aggression that he wants to output, right? Like, you want to make sure that if you're getting this kind of an aggressive opener and kind of sacking your Fire Quench to do it, that you get the returns you need. So, that's concerning. We see a Volfi ban instead, leaving both swap-ins opening, instead getting rid of something that would otherwise ruin a lot of Wiki Kernel's backline. So this keeps the Valish a bit safer, the Golzy a bit safer. All of those feel a bit nicer now that they don't have to worry about that. Obviously, the Golzy can full-body tackle that Volfi any day of the week, but the issue with it is, if it gets that hold up, then it will just ruin most of Wiki Kernel's backline. The Mimit also means that we have the entire potential of double Fire Quench, which is truly monstrous. It's a spooky thing. And it also means that there's potential for a couple other really valuable double ends here. Wiki Kernel's team definitely makes good use of their Mimit. We see the Ociara, Tolkien, and Mimit there, so all those things I was worried about for Wiki Kernel, NekoBlakii is bringing. It looks like this may very well be a different game. I feel like it's a nicer draft. Not letting Kinu through is really a good thing for aggro teams. So this turn 1 really comes down to how is this initial trade going to go down? Do either of our openers blink here? Because, like, if Wiki Kernel does just swap out the Fire Quench for, I don't know, Mimit? Valish is probably the best thing to swap it out for, but swapping in a Valish on a tireless Shook still feels a bit awkward, Swapping out the Yowler when it's got camo feels even more awkward. Swapping in the Mimit means that you get Mashuk here. Mashuk into this field is actually quite nice, so I think that's a reasonable thing if Wiki Kernel blinks. If NekoBlakii blinks, we've already discussed this. We see a Token hit the field. Heater is amazing into this. You don't really want it turn 1 against a lot of the things here, though, so maybe not that. Maybe you go for the Ociara instead, but if that becomes a Mashuk, that's really painful for it. We do see the Mimit come out. So that transforms into Wiki Kernel's own tireless Mashuk here, which, if this is an Ociara, anticipates it beautifully. And it is. NekoBlakii is on the back foot with this swap. Definitely running the risk of being a bit too open to this. Now, this is interesting tech, though. Humiliating Slap means that you're still getting the minus def while sapping your own stamina, which is, of course, something you want to do with tireless Mashuk. So I'm assuming in this instance, she runs that instead of perfect jab, meaning that it's kind of harder to get that minus defense off before you hit your low stamina sort of position. But it definitely helps you get there. stops you from being locked into the wastewater, and it's safer if you're anticipating a swap, as we saw with this. So we get a Cerbitio's Wrath does go down. This is kind of ballsy because it's basically like expecting that you're going to take these down. That did not feel like that was good returns on NekoBlakii's investment there, seeing as the wastewater just smashed into OCR hardcore there. This alongside the suplex is basically going to destroy that. Yeah, no, the OCR kind of felt like it didn't wind up doing much there. My question is, was that sacrificed on purpose, or was this like a gamble in case of another swap? I'm not entirely sure why that would be. One thing this does do is, I suppose, leave things a bit more open for Tolkien. But, like, I feel like in becoming Mashuk and getting the wastewater suplex off, Wiki Kernel's already ahead. Like, this is kind of trying to bring things back. And the problem is Golzi swaps into this board beautifully. It eats the uppercut, it eats the wastewater, and you can't really do a wind move into it at all. So I'm a little concerned about what this Tolkien's actually going to be able to get up to in this field, because Wiki Kernel is very capable of repositioning here. Additionally, it's not like anything here is actually scaring away Yowler outside of the Mashuk just continuing to do Mashuk things. Now, a tireless H-slap into Yowler does feel really good. Oh, it's a cage! Okay, I like that. So now we know the 4 moves that NekoBlakii has on their Mashuk. That's a really powerful combo. The Mimic goes down to the Windburst thanks to the cage. Very good trap right there. This does mean we have a bit of a capacity for Wiki Kernel to respond to this aggression. A Sparkling Bullet Golzi into this field is pretty nightmarish, and there's nothing stopping it. But it is going to be eating some +1 H-slaps, which, you don't like those. My problem is that the most spammable move for Mashuk right now is the one that doesn't kill Golzi. And Golzi is just eyeing this Tolkien hungrily as the biggest downside of killing something on the turn you cage is very sort of witnessable right here, right? So I've also just overlooked the fact that the Yowler, while Chamomile, has hibernated, so this thing's right back up to full. It's still got minus defense, so that's still very punchable, but it's just that much more for NekoBlakii to break through while having already lost an Ociara into this field, and looking to lose their Tolkien alongside it. So the Tornado comes down into the Yowler. It looks like the aim of the game now is just get this bear off the board. The Sparkling Bullet comes down into the Mashuk. I'm actually surprised by that. Like, the Tolkien's right there, buddy. So the wastewater comes in onto the Yowler, and it looks like the reasoning for this was to get the Mashuk's health down low enough that the cast from HP there for the wastewater basically KOs it. But that, I don't think, played out well there. Like, you had a real good shot to just nuke the Tolkien. I'm very surprised that it didn't get taken. Because now the Mashuk can just, wastewater this Koish, and it feels terrible unless somehow you're okay, you could just, swap your Valashin and Ketsa the Mashuk. That's pretty hardcore, but I think it can work. But, I don't know, that feels like a bad play into a Tolkien with 2 hold. Because now the Fire Tornado's up, and Tolkien can really play silly buggers with this. At 30% stamina, I don't think you're overexerting from a Fire Tornado. It's possible, but I don't think it's, set in stone by any stretch of the imagination. I may be salting on Wiki Kernel hard here, but I'm just astonished that you didn't take the opportunity to just take out this Tolkien. It still kind of tears apart parts of the back line that you might want to attend to, and now it's just going to hide in the back as Mimit comes out pretending to be a Fire Koish. So, Fire Koish is out here, Charged Iron Filings comes down and just ruins the poor Mimit. So the Charged Iron Filings still would have obviously hit the Tolkien, but of course with the swap-ins and everything like that, it's kind of awkward. I gotta say, Golzi is making waves in these games. I am astonished. It's been very maligned recently in the competitive field due to lacking priority, but as things are slowing down, things are looking a little better for our angry hairy boy here. Valish, on the other hand, does still very deeply intimidate this field. The problem that I have with Valish doing enough here is that, sure, you can Crystal Spikes the Golzi, but you're still taking a Ketsa to the face, and I'm pretty sure that becomes a Valish. Now, you might not want to do that yet just because the Fire Quaish is here and you want to just like get rid of the Mimit Fire Quaish. But I think you're going to have to deal with fires in that slot anyways. The token's still in the back. NekoBlakii has intentionally set this up to ensure that there is a board state that is very disadvantageous for a late game Valish on Wiki Kernel's side. So the Crystal Spikes comes down and almost kills the Golzey. A combination of Quetzaleno and the Crystal Spikes just takes the poor dude out. Good thing it got a lot of value beforehand because it's definitely just out of here now. The Quetzaleno comes down on Valish though and doesn't even need the synergy. It's just a hardcore one-shot. So here we are. This is pretty down to the wire. We have a token that does have Fire Tornado up. If this outspeeds this Valish, that's bad news. Obviously, the Water Cannon will wind up making the play on that side, but Wind Burst will equally well, it'll still do a lot of damage to Quaish, especially since this Quaish looks like it's made of paper given how quickly it tore apart that Valash. So my expectation this turn is like Crystal Dust onto the Mimit just to take it out, and then like not take a ton of damage from a Quetzaleno that you don't have to eat, because otherwise that will hit this Valish in the face, and the double in will most assuredly take this boy out. Water Cannon does come down before the token acts, so that's very interesting to see, as the Wind Burst actually comes down into the Quaish instead. This kind of seals NekoBlakii losing the second game. If there had been like just a bit more play around, and if somehow this token had managed to get some damage onto the Valish, this would be a very different board, but instead this token is forced to focus this Quaish and loses so much health in the process. It's very liable just to be taken down by a Fire Tornado, by Crystal Spikes now, and I'm pretty sure a Fire Tornado does not one-shot this Valish. It might still, like, we might still have a chance for NekoBlakii if Neko can live at 21% Crystal Spikes from Valish and then hit back with a Fire Tornado, but I don't like those odds. Yeah, looking at this, it's kind of like Wiki Kernel's got it in the bag again. So, once again, welcome to everybody who's just shown up as we enter the final stages of this match between NekoBlakii and Wiki Kernel. Wiki Kernel having won the initial engagement between these two and looking to take away the second one unless a miracle can happen with this token and it can live a Crystal Spikes. If it lives the Crystal Spikes and one-shots with the Fire Tornado, that's enough, but it is not, as Wiki Kernel takes the 2-0 against NekoBlakii in this Group B. Well played to Wiki Kernel. But don't go away, we still have matches available, as right into this we now do also have Axolotus and Gold, I believe, unless I'm horribly mistaken. I am horribly mistaken, I apologize, folks. That match has been postponed. So, once again, we have a number of separate matches sort of speckled around this entire sort of series of weeks. I know, it's a tragedy. But we'll certainly keep you posted, as always, with what is happening next. I don't believe we have anything else scheduled for today inside this tournament until roughly 11 hours from now, where Luke Leal will be facing off against Sorty Rob. So keep your eyes peeled and stay tuned for that as well. That should be very exciting indeed. I believe we have some other charming casters set up for that. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and say farewell to you all for now until we meet again. Obviously, there's plenty more to be seen in the future inside the TemTeam Cup. This has been an experimental sort of foray into this new format that Tylo has been crafting for a good period of time here. I'd like to thank you so much all for coming and checking out these fine games. Don't forget to, of course, poke the little button that lets you know when this channel's up again, because that'll be really valuable if you want to catch all the rest of these. And in the meantime, thank you very much and have a lovely day.